Welcome into Bama Central 3 and Out, everyone, with Tony Sukalis and Joey Blackwell. I'm Katie Wyndham. And guys, last week was the NBA draft. Alabama basketball continued their streak of having a player drafted, with J.D. Davison going in the second round to the Celtics. One player that wasn't drafted but was kind of projected on some boards was Keon Ellis. He ended up signing a deal with the Sacramento Kings. I know he was a player a couple fan bases were looking forward to getting to their teams. And Tony, even though Keon did not get drafted last week, how do you think this deal kind of worked out for him? And do you see a path for him to an NBA roster next season?
Yeah, I know a lot of people were expecting, or at least a lot of Alabama fans were hoping or expecting Keon Ellis to get drafted. But in reality, this might be a good thing for him to not get drafted. He's joining a Kings roster that's in definite need of a 3-and-D kind of wing player. And he's exactly that. It's also a Kings roster where, let's face it, he has, the ability. He's not going to the most stacked roster in the NBA as well. So, I think this is a lot better case for Keon Ellis than maybe getting drafted, in the middle of the second round to another team that has an athletic guard wing kind of player like he is. Obviously, he signed a 2-way contract with the Kings. He probably will spend a little bit of time in the G League, but I think with a strong summer, and if he's able to show a little bit more consistency, I think he could definitely be a guy that makes that roster and fills a role as a kind of like a defensive guy, an energy guy off the bench. I think for a rebuilding program like the Kings, I think he's a great fit.
Yeah, when Ellis arrived from JUCO, a couple of years ago, Alabama was fairly loaded with wings. They had a pair of soon-to-be pros in Josh Primo and Herb Jones on that SEC championship roster. Obviously Primo became that lottery pick, and Jones was SEC Player of the Year. Obviously went to the Pelicans. The fact that Ellis was still able to carve out 17 and a half minutes roughly per game with that roster shows, it was really telling. Nate, of course, was talking about how a while ago he talked about how Keon Ellis, was constantly figuring out how he could get himself on the floor. He talked about Primo and Jones and how they already had two good players at that position, and how Ellis is really, of course, a solid 2-way guy. And as Tony said, he's your classic 3-and-D guy, and that's exactly what the Sacramento Kings are getting out of him, and that's exactly what they need right now. Obviously, they signed him to a 2-way contract. But Ellis, his accolades, speak for themselves, and his stats, kind of jump off the page a little bit when you're talking about a guy that's solid on both ends of the court, on both offense and defense. So really, like Tony said, they're still a rebuilding program. They need all the help they can get. And, with that, you really like Ellis's odds at kind of being a key factor in that rebuilding process.
Well, I think Alabama fans have kind of seen, but this past year with what happened with Herb Jones, he's a guy who worked really hard on defense and was really good on that end of the floor, and that was able to get him, eventually, on the Pelicans roster and playing time, and then eventually a starting job. So, he's a guy that, because of his defense, was able to see a lot of success in the NBA. And, there's that type of potential with Keon Ellis as well. And so it'll be interesting to see his basketball journey in the NBA moving forward. But that will wrap us up for today's 3 and Out. Thanks for watching.